Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica, Situ's Partner Engagement Manager, and I am delighted to welcome you to Situ's Beyond Booking webinar, Regulation of Short-Term Lets in Spain and Barcelona. So today, who do we have? We have Richard from Yes Consulting, and we have Viktorija from European Holiday Home Association. So I will now hand over to our fantastic speakers. I will let them introduce themselves in a bit more detail. Richard, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. As you can see from the screen, I'm founding partner of Yes Consulting, and we work on assisting managers grow their business, followed up by a certain amount of M&A as well, in short-term rentals specifically, UK, Europe, and the USA. And I'm going to be introducing Viktorija Molnar to you in a minute, who is the fount of all knowledge related to EU regulations. And although she's still smiling, I'm astonished she manages it. But there is some data around this has been published by Airbnb recently that might just set the scene for this a little bit. And they've been referring to the Oxford Economics Report. And the Oxford Economics Report comes from Oxford University, and they consider themselves to be the foremost economics advisors in Europe. And this report, just setting the scene, gives data on short-term rentals. And the numbers, 5 of them, are direct tourism spend of 127.5 billion euros. 26.5 billion of that is host earnings. Gross domestic product impact, 148 billion euros. Total tax revenues, which is a very important part of this conversation going forward, is just under 40 billion euros. And lo and behold, it supports over 2.1 million jobs. So next step is Viktorija will introduce herself, but when you've done that, Viktorija, would you mind segmenting the various regulations that you are addressing into understandable packages for the rest of us, and then we can go through each one. Okay, thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Viktorija, and I represent European Holiday Home Association, or as we call it, EHHA. EHHA is the voice of short-term rental accommodation in Europe, and its members are national associations, which represent property managers, property owners, sometimes both, online short-term rental platforms, but also companies which provide ancillary services to the short-term rental accommodation providers. So I'm a lawyer by education, and I analyze the laws at the EU and member state level to see how they impact the short-term rental industry. And if I or my colleagues identify the issue that could significantly impact the industry, we engage in the lobbying and advocacy. And I personally talk to the EU policymakers in Brussels to address these issues. So once I read the definition of the lawyer, they say that the lawyer is somebody who writes 10,000 words document and calls it a brief. So I will try to make the information as simple as possible for the listeners of this webinar. So, Richard, you mentioned a very good assessment, right, of what impact short-term rental industry actually does to the global, to the overall economy. I would also like to emphasize the fact that short-term rentals is a consumer-driven phenomenon. Eurostat has signed a landmark agreement with 4 online short-term rental platforms, and Eurostat is European Statistical Office. So they collect statistical information. So they signed the agreement with the platforms, and they publish the short-term rental data, aggregated data, I think every 3 months or so. And Eurostat calculated that 719 million guest nights were spent in the short-term rentals in the EU during the 2023. And this number is increasing on a year-by-year basis. I think this number was 20% more than the data, than the statistics from the 2022 year of 2022. So this 719 million guest nights in short-term rentals in 2023 means that around 125 short-term renter stays are booked each minute. 125 stays each minute. So you can imagine like how people love short-term rentals, right? So it is consumer-driven phenomenon. Now about the regulation of the short-term rentals. Short-term rentals, if you look across the world in Europe, they are being regulated pretty much on three main issues. So it is housing, it is over-tourism, and taxation. So regulation of all these issues usually remains in the member states' hands. So in this case, in the Spain's hands. So Spain is able to regulate short-term rentals if they want to address housing issues, over-tourism, etc. So it is being considered here in Brussels at the European Union level that member states are in the best position to regulate local issues. And housing and tourism are actually local issues. However, the EU plays a significant role in making sure that EU single market works. European Union, is based on the single market, and I'm sure that some of you may have heard this definition, single market. But what does it actually mean, the single market? To put it very shortly, it means that people, capital, goods and services should move freely within the borders of European Union, and there should be, in principle, no restrictions, to move. So that is the utopian world, right? The issue of regulating housing and tourism and taxation, particularly in the context of short-term rentals, is very, very complex in Europe, in European Union. So we have rules at European Union level, and we have rules at the member state Spanish level. So, however, or whenever we have rules at European Union level, member states of European Union, they're always obliged to follow the EU rules. So in this case, whenever we have EU rules, Spain is obliged to follow these EU rules. So now, what are the key EU legislation existing now, which directly affects short-term rental accommodation providers? So the most significant one, and is the most recent one, well, not the most recent one, but the most significant one, is regulation on the short-term rental data collection and sharing. It has been adopted last year, and it will become applicable from May next year, 2026. I'm aware that Spain is looking how to apply this regulation earlier, and they are already passed the law, short-term rental law, which shall apply from 1st of July of this year. So what is now, let's talk about EU regulation first. So what does this regulation do? The regulation on the short-term rental data collection and sharing aims to create a balanced short-term rental data sharing and collection framework in the EU. So the aim of regulation is to improve the transparency on short-term rentals, so that authorities would be able to get the data, who the short-term rental accommodation providers are, and based on this data, authorities would be able to do evidence-based policies at the local level. So it is the framework, and the member states, I said that it's a balanced data sharing framework, meaning that member states, if they want to get activity data from online short-term rental platforms, and activity data here is for how many, what kind of bookings were made on online platforms, for how many guests the short-term rental accommodation was booked for. This data, online platforms will have to feed to the public authorities, but public authorities, they will have to do the homework too. They will have to create registration procedures for short-term rental accommodation providers. So it can be hosts, it can be property managers, where these people, these providers will have to go there, register the unit, and they will immediately get the registration number. So anyway, so all the system is a bit complicated. It is being implemented in Spain as well. They are working on it, but the idea is that, or the hope actually is that as soon as authorities, local authorities will have the real data, they will be able to make local policies affecting, for example, over-tourism housing based on evidence, based on data, so that we wouldn't be in the situation which we are right now. The short-term rental rules at the local level are usually based on perceptions and feelings, right? So that is the regulation. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah. So you mentioned one word in there, Viktorija. So most of the people listening probably running accommodation, or the managers, or they're thinking of investing. You said the word platform, which always kind of worries me a bit, because platforms are websites run by managers, they are OTAs. What is the definition of a platform in terms of the European Union and their understanding? And also, what have you faced in terms of challenges of their understanding of what a platform is?
Yeah, I think I need to be fair to say that this regulation was drafted by having the big online platforms in mind, right? So there will be this, they will have to create APIs, so-called APIs, connections with the member states points through which they will be feeding the data. But responding to your question, what are the online platforms? Online platforms is being understood very widely at the European Union level. So it is pretty much everyone who has the website and facilitates the short-term rental accommodation bookings. So there will be, it is foreseen in this regulation that actually two different sort of compliance regimes are foreseen for the big guys, for the big online platforms, and for the smaller ones. The smaller ones, they will also have to comply with this regulation. Those who have the websites, right? But they will be able to feed the activity data manually and on the quarterly basis. And the big guys will feed the activity data to the authorities automatically and on a monthly basis. So, so this is the regime which the regulation sets.
Yeah, before we move on to the other regulations, Viktorija, I know there's a lot more. This collection of data from the platforms, and you say Spain, we know Spain is a super hyperactive country in terms of enforcing, and I'm probably not out of order saying hotels are probably very interested in ensuring this happens. Is there a time scale attached to this that you're aware of, or are we waiting for news of when these things can be implemented?
So if we talk about the regulation on the short-term rental data collection and sharing, regulation itself is actually directly applicable law. So member states should in principle not do any additional laws. It's just directly applicable. But this regulation is slightly different because it sets the framework, but member states need to do the homework. So they need to adapt the registration procedures. They need to create such registration procedures if they have none. They have to create connections between online platforms and their authorities so that the provision of data would flow smoothly. But as I said, the regulation shall apply from next year, May 2026. In the meantime, as I said, Spain is working how to establish these connection points with the platforms, etc., etc. So they want to make this regulation work as soon as possible. And they already passed the law. The law was passed, I think, at the beginning of this year, actually December, I think, last year. And now, according to this law, the Spanish law implementing the regulation should be applicable from 1st of July this year. So they want to do it faster.
So just closing out this regulation one, the data will go at a local level in the 27 states. They will collect it and they'll aggregate it into a single European data set, presumably, because there is already a European data set, isn't there, for the major OTAs, which is reported, I think, quarterly. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct, Richard. So every member state will have a separate sort of connection to online platforms. So every member state will get only the data, obviously, which they are interested in their member state data. So Spain will have one channel to connect it to the platforms, like France will have another channel. So we potentially may have 27 different sort of channels where platforms will have to feed the data.
Okay. Well, why doesn't that surprise me? And if anybody is listening from the UK, whatever Viktorija says, I would personally anticipate it will come across the channel at some point as well. We already have data collection in the UK, and if managers aren't aware of it, they should have been reporting from January 31st this year, I think. So, Viktorija, I'm particularly interested in VIDA. And I know this is a very hot topic. Perhaps you'd like to move on to that one.
Yeah, so VIDA is another EU legislative act. It is going to be approved quite soon by the member states' governments. Probably it is going to happen next month. But VIDA is probably the most concerning EU legislative act. So while regulation, we see sort of as an opportunity, we hope that, the data will be there, authorities will see the data, and it should hopefully lead to better policy making at the local level. But the VAT file is very concerning. As I say, I think it will complicate life for many short-term rental accommodation providers. So what does it do? It actually shifts the way the value-added tax VAT should be handled by the online short-term rental platform. So if you are a private person and you are putting the advertisement on online platform will be obliged to charge the VAT on the top of the price which you are putting. If you are the SME, which falls below the VAT, national VAT threshold, you're sort of considered professional, but you don't pay VAT. And if you do the same, if you put the advertisement of the short-term rental accommodation on online platform will have to charge the VAT and remit this VAT to the taxation authority where the accommodation is based. So what it essentially does, it sort of considers that online platform is the supplier of short-term rental accommodation services, and for that reason they have to charge VAT and remit the VAT. So pretty much these rules are pulling every single non-VAT payer, short-term rental accommodation provider, into the VAT net.
And is the VAT standard across Europe, or is it 22% in Denmark and 3% in Luxembourg?
Exactly. So we have variety of VAT rates across the EU. So we have, first of all, standard VAT rates. So it can vary really from 21% to 27% across the member states. Then we have reduced VAT rates. So this is usually where hotels are benefiting from, right? So it can again vary from 9 to 15%. Yeah, in Denmark it is the biggest one, 23%. And then obviously there are other categories of the VAT rates. So we don't have a single VAT in the European Union, and for online platforms, I think it will be a nightmare because they will have always to understand which VAT rates applies in which member state for short-term rental accommodation providers. They will have to charge it, remit it. I think it will be just, as I said, the life will be very, very complicated.
Yeah, there's a million questions in there. And I don't really know where to start because I don't think we've got all day to do this. But if I was an individual owner and I'm not VAT registered in a European state, and I put my property on Airbnb, they will be obliged to add VAT to that. So, and that VAT will be remitted to a central European bank, I guess, that controls the VAT inputs.
So if you are, so they are looking at the VAT here based on where the short-term rental accommodation is based. So if you are British and you have a property in Spain, right? So as soon as you put the property on online platform, the platform will charge the VAT, which Spain puts the VAT on short-term rentals. They will charge the Spanish VAT, and they will remit this VAT to the Spanish taxation authority. This is how it works.
Yeah, is there any opportunity for VAT registered companies to do reclaims of VAT as the same as hotels would?
Yes, so the rules are very basic for now, and we have been addressing a lot of issues like your question. So these questions, I think, remain unanswered. So we will have to continue working, raising awareness on the complexity of the short-term rental ecosystem, because when these rules were drafted, all these complexities, unfortunately, were not considered and were not taken into account.
Okay, so yeah, it's probably best not to go too far into this, but there is a final question on VIDA is that short-term rentals, how do you define a short-term rental as opposed to a hotel apartment, as opposed to a serviced apartment? Because do they all fall under the same heading if they're an apartment?
So short-term VIDA defines, puts a definition for short-term rentals, and they say that short-term rentals is of a similar nature as hotels, and they are being rented for less than 30 days. Subject member states do not have other definitions. So there are possibilities for member states not to apply this deemed supply regime, this VIDA, but we will see what member states decides. But in principle, the idea of this VAT proposal was to, as they say it, to level the playing field between the short-term rentals and hotels. So they say that, look, hotels are paying so many taxes and short-term rentals pay none. For that reason, they decided to pull all the non-VAT payers into VAT net to level the playing field, which we, of course, do not agree.
Okay, right. Thanks for that, Viktorija. So reporting and VIDA, I mean, in terms of other things coming down the pipeline, obviously registration and licensing are also attached, I guess, to reporting. I mean, what are the other things that you would consider to be highlights and the things that give you sleepless nights?
I think what contributes to the lack of sleep during my nights is actually local regulation, because, as I said, member states, they still retain the power. Well, they retain the power to regulate short-term rentals on issues such as housing and over-tourism, right? So this is their competence. And I think this is where the biggest problems kicks in, because most of these short-term rental rules, and especially in Spain, are not based on evidence and are not based on data. And for that reason, I think such rules just causes issues for absolutely everyone, to the enforcers, to the public authorities, because these rules, I mean, are usually hard to enforce. They usually don't do anything. They don't, achieve any policy goals with these rules. And at the same time, I think it makes huge implications on the short-term rental industry, right? So they are being banned. They are exposed to overly restrictive measures, etc. So I think local rules are the most problematic for short-term rental industry, and especially in Spain.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put you on the line and get a quotation out of you, which is incorrect, but you obviously study a lot of data and have a lot of information. Is there any information that shows that short-term rentals are damaging the housing market substantially? I can understand in certain areas there might be, some significant influence, but in general, is this happening, do you think, particularly in Spain?
No, I think let us be fair. There could be situations in certain cities, in certain areas within the cities, right? So where there's a huge sort of number of short-term rentals, and they may have some sort of impact to the housing, right? But if you look at all these restrictions which are being put on short-term rentals, and if you look at the worldwide situation, these restrictions are very unfair, because they are literally blaming short-term rentals for, all the housing issues, all the over-tourism issues, even the climate change. Short-term rentals are being blamed, and there's no data to prove that short-term rentals are the only and lonely sort of factor which causes the lack of housing, affordable housing, increases over tourism, etc. So and that is very obvious. So for example, I'll maybe mention the New York City, right? So New York City banned short-term rentals 1.5 years ago. And the idea was, the same, that there are no housing in New York City, and for that reason, people should not be able to do the short-term rental. After 1.5 years, New York City is now reconsidering it. They are thinking to revert the ban, because this ban did absolutely nothing. The prices of the housing is still increasing. The prices of the rents are still increasing. The vacancy rates remain unchanged. So nothing changed. What changed is that, people, as they couldn't advertise their properties on legal channels or on online platforms, they went and started advertising properties on, through other channels which are not regulated. And here I'm talking about social media. such as Facebook and Instagram, because these social media platforms, they usually fall out of the scope of regulation, and they fall out of the scope because it is very difficult to track and monitor who is doing what on these social media platforms. So these sort of bans, they don't do the job, they don't work, and they don't work because we are facing very complex housing dynamics, right? So, there are so many factors contributing to the lack of housing, to the increasing prices, and I think it is very unfair to blame short-term rentals for all the existing issues.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because today there was an article published in the UK in the Telegraph, and it was from some various property organisations with data, and essentially it's the same issue. The government is enforcing regulations, FHL removing the benefits, there's increases, lack of housing, etc., etc., and this report is essentially saying that people will buy second homes, but they will be the even wealthier people, and they're already buy these homes, and these places will actually become empty because tourism is actually the main income stream for them. So I know you're in Spain, and Barcelona is the most noisy of cities in Spain, particularly the mayor, who seems to be driving this through his political ambitions. But so what about Barcelona, Viktorija? What's the prediction of what might happen in, I think it's 3 years, is it, or 2 years?
Yeah, so look, so the Barcelona has the licensing regime, right? They introduced the licensing regime 10 years ago, and they said, look, we are putting the sort of the benchmark of 10,000 licenses for short-term rentals in the city of Barcelona. They had this licensing regime for 10 years, and regardless of these restrictive measures, which we consider these are restrictive measures, the rents still during the last 10 years have risen by 70%. While the average price of the home has increased by 60%. So it just shows that, even those quite restrictive situation in Barcelona, which put only 10,000 licenses available for short-term rentals, it made absolutely no impact to the housing situation in Barcelona. And yet, as you said yourself, the mayor of Barcelona still aims to phase out absolutely all licenses, right? So there should be, according to his plans, 0 short-term rentals. So this, I think will make absolutely no impact, because the Oxford Economics did the study in 2023, and they said that the proportion of the overall housing stock dedicated to short-term rentals in Barcelona does not exceed 1.5%. So Mayor of Barcelona literally is addressing 1% of the housing. So what kind of impact you can expect if you put these over-restrictive measures? Mayor of Barcelona can, of course, he can do the ban. We don't see that it follows the EU rules. So we will do our work on our side, but according to PricewaterhouseCoopers study, they believe that this ban on short-term rentals in Barcelona will put 1.9 billion of city's GDP in risk, and it will probably put even 40,000 jobs at risk in Barcelona, because we know that short-term rentals is a very heavy labor activity, right? So everything is being outsourced. It relies on the ancillary service providers, etc. So I think it will be just a loss situation in Barcelona, and it will not bring the so much expected. I don't think the Barcelona mayor will achieve the goals which he wants to achieve.
Maybe you'd like to be mayor of Barcelona, Viktorija, a lawyer in charge of a city. That kind of makes sense. Evidence-based politicians. Yeah, I mean, we're coming probably pretty close to the end of this, and I don't know if Jessica's allowing people to ask questions, but I mean, I have a question. Let's assume that I am actually an operator of apartments, like a typical manager in Spain at the moment. I mean, everything you said is worrying in a number of ways. One, the VAT situation, because in certain situations, it's going to make it much more expensive for a guest to book. So, you know, I'm sure there's escape routes and there's probably direct booking and various other ways people will try and navigate that. But it does make it look as though traveling could be more expensive, which might do the UK wonders because everybody's leaving the UK to go to Spain on holiday by the looks of it every year. The other thing is that the description of short-term rentals and hotels and hotel apartments. I mean, I've definitely noticed a strategic trend from large managers to think, okay, do we want distributed? Do we want properties everywhere? Maybe we should start thinking about hotel apartments and stepping into the hotel scene in what might be considered a short-term rental way by automating everything and still using the same distribution channels. I mean, is that something you're hearing? People are thinking they need to remodel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, that's probably the result of these over-restrictive measures against short-term rentals. Because if you're putting such rules where providers cannot comply with, people will start looking for ways how to go around them. And I think you perfectly made examples, you know, people, you know, just finding the ways how to do the business by literally, you know, doing it somehow in different ways. So, and I think this is what is going to happen if these rules will continue, you know, to be restrictive in Spain. People will find the ways how to go around them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, kind of final question in terms of what's coming down the pipeline, because you'll know what is coming. I mean, I have heard things like sustainability are on the horizon as well, and we're seeing that in various quarters. Is that being talked about at some point in the future? You're going to have some regulatory body auditing your property, and otherwise it won't be rentable. It won't be rental anyway in Barcelona. But you know, is this something that's happening?
Yes, so EU is also working on this Green Deal, so-called Green Deal, which part of it obliges property owners, you know, to update and renovate their properties and comply with all the environmental standards, right? So, while of course it's a good thing to do, but at the same time, I think it can cause a lot of burden for the property owners. Especially those who have old properties, because old properties, of course, you know, they need to comply with different standards, right? So if you have a heritage building, obviously you have to comply with renovation, which is specifically made for heritage buildings, right? So that increases a lot of cost for the property owners, and it can be actually an obstacle to provide short-term rental services, because I know that some member states in Europe, they have made such a high environmental standards for the property owners and if they will not achieve that standard, they will not be able to rent the properties for short-term rentals. So these environmental certificate standards can actually act as an obstacle to provide short-term rental accommodation services.
Okay, I think there's enough terror from this conversation already if you're an operator in Europe. So just final thing, the associations are a very important part of Europe and the UK in terms of contesting many of these things and making sense of them. So do you just want to reinforce who you're working for, Viktorija, and how people can actually join the associations?
Yes, so I'm the European Holiday Home Association. This is the European Association, which unites national associations, online platforms, but also companies, which understands the meaning of doing business and doing the lobbying for their benefit. But we also have national associations in different member states, and we have a number of actually local associations in Spain, which are really working hard to make the rules at the local level better for the providers of short-term rental accommodation services. So I would really encourage you to join these associations because they have all the knowledge about the local rules, which are changing a lot in Spain. And they're the ones who can help you actually to deal with certain situations, and they can answer to your questions more specifically.
Thanks, Viktorija. So Jessica, I'll move back to you, but it'd be really good if Situ could actually make sure that the links are published to the associations and possibly the Oxford Economics Report as well. So hand it back to you, Jessica.
Gosh, hello. Thank you so much. I mean, thank you, Richard, for hosting today, and Viktorija for your valuable insights, and to everyone which has joined today. Absolutely fantastic discussions. So, what is next for Situ? Well, let me tell you. I will quickly make sure that the screen's covered. There you go. So, we can see the learnings for this webinar on the left-hand side, and in regards to what is next for Situ's Beyond Booking webinar series, we have the regulation of short-term let in Holland and Amsterdam on the 25th of March at 11 AM with Marta, Business Development Manager, and she's from the Eurohome Relocation Services, and Danielle, which is the Country Director from ERES Relocation. If you would like to join, please see the link in the webinar chat to register. I will leave this slide up for a few more minutes for you to read, but I just want to say thank you ever so much again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you very much.